Today we are in talks with Justin, who is leading Junk Theory. Junk Theory, a pretty interesting name and a pretty interesting story behind it. It shows the importance of IP even when you are naming your startup. Justin has a very interesting story to tell about it. But more importantly, Junk Theory started with a vision where he wanted to create a brand where absolutely nothing goes in trash. And that's how he came up with aluminum bottles as packaging for clean products. To create an impact, you have to create a better product than what sits to the left and to the right of the to your product on the shelf. And I think that is what is the reason that there is 40% repeatability or retention in customers who are buying products from Junk Theory. It's an interesting journey, and Justin is a practical CEO. There are a lot of lessons to be learned from the challenges that he faced when he was starting the company to the organic growth that he has been trying to make sustainable to the next steps where they are going to sit on premium brand and its shelf. So let's talk more about this with Justin. Can you give us a bit of a background about the origin story? Of course, I know about your visit. Was it Jakarta, I believe, where you saw the plastic island, and then that's where the origin of this idea of junk theory came into picture. But what were your thoughts? What were your feelings, which actually compelled you? Because thousands of people would have seen that island, but nobody else decided to actually go the plastic-free route. Right. So what
Yeah.
was happening in your mind?
So I think pretty much most of my career, I've been involved in the impact space. I've not had like a typical linear career where I'm following one career path from the day I graduated college to where I am today. And a lot of time has passed in between that period. But impact has been a really, really important part of my career, whether, I was an attorney. I used to be a project finance attorney. I worked on clean energy projects around the world, probably deployed about 5 billion in capital towards wind and solar projects around the world. Later transitioned to entrepreneurship and met some partners. I had co-founded a brand called UB, which was like the Tom Shoes of school supplies. For every item we sold, we donated one to kids in need in the US. That company grew very quickly and has now, already provided more than 7 million kids in the US with
Wow.
free sets of school supplies. It provides about 2,000 kids a day right now with about 14, school supply items that teachers are most likely to spend money out of pocket on. So amazing. It feels so good to work, in that kind of space and to have that kind of impact with a brand that you've built. So over the course of 8 years of working at UB as the chief giving officer, my co-founders there had launched a beauty incubator where they had very strong relationships with retailers and very strong relationships with celebrities and influencers. So someone wants to launch a skincare line or a cosmetic line, very easy for them to do. They, had the vertical
Mhm.
very well in their pocket. But everything was done sort of in a shared services way. So where UB was operating, the beauty brands were being, or cosmetic brands were being built out. And that's where I got my first kind of peek behind the curtain. I had, no real background or experience in beauty specifically. I did have background in impact and consumer brands by that point. But I used to joke around and say the last time I had put anything on my face was camouflage in the army. so, um, but the more I got to understand this kind of beauty industry, the more that I realized that the economics in it are very, very interesting. The margins are the kind of things that you could only dream of. Um, so the business behind beauty I thought was very interesting, despite it being a very crowded space. I think in light of it being as crowded as it was, if you wanted to break through and succeed in the category, you really had to innovate. And that can take a lot of different forms, from formula to packaging to, story and brand and the likes. But what I really realized was, and this was back in 2019, where I'm seeing this meteoric rise of, quote, clean beauty. The
Yeah,
problem is that no one can tell me what clean beauty actually means.
that is true.
At the end of the day, what people are really talking about when they talk clean beauty is formula, right? So are the ingredients that are being used in these formulas healthy for people and planet? To what extent are we putting harmful ingredients on our skin, and to what extent are we, sourcing ingredients that may cause harm to the planet, or when we're done using the stuff and washing it off, is it going to cause harm to the environment? But for me, when those clean formulas would come packaged in, ginormous double-walled plastic acrylic jars, the whole
Yeah.
story behind it being clean all of a sudden just didn't feel right to me. You know,
Yeah.
skincare and beauty is, are single use products. You're going to use an average product for about 2 months. And then you got
Yeah.
to ask yourself, what's going to happen to this packaging, right? That it comes in, right? And my thinking was the kind of person that would be attracted to clean beauty is probably also attracted to the idea of a brand taking an additional step around sustainability,
That
right?
makes sense. Yeah.
But even to this day, like I want to say 90% of brands are still, calling themselves clean or not, are continue to come packaged in plastic, right? The
Yeah.
problem here in the US is that, and this is a big educational piece of the brand, and I think consumers need to know this, is that, to be quite honest, less than 5% of plastic is recycled here in the US, even
Yeah.
when you put it in the blue bin, right? So
Yeah.
we're kind of diluting ourselves into believing or wish cycling, that this stuff is real. But at the end of the day, ultimately, what's happening is that you're using a product for 2 months. It's going to then sit on the planet realistically at about a 95% chance.
Yeah.
It's going to sit
Yeah.
on the planet for the next 500 years, right?
Yeah.
So that prompted me to say, hey, wait a second. This is a moment of we can do something different in this space. How do we stand out, right? We don't have the money or the resources. And quite honestly, I don't like the celebrity model. I find it very disingenuous. And what does that celebrity really know about healthy, good skincare? Are they a doctor? No. So I wanted to distinguish ourselves by rethinking what it meant to be a clean beauty brand, right? Can we rethink this in a way where we're not just talking about formula? Like the conversation doesn't end with formula, it
Yeah.
begins there. Of course, our formulas are going to be clean, healthy. We're going to do, put a lot of thought into, what kind of ingredients we're going to be using. Are they domestic? Are they international? Are they hard to find? Are they exotic? Do they affect ecosystems and things like that, right? But what I wanted to do with my co-founder, she and I, we asked ourselves a pretty simple question, actually. Would it be possible to create a brand where absolutely nothing goes in the trash?
Mm-hmm.
It's a
Wow.
simple question, and I think it can apply to industries, across the consumer space. Can we create a brand where nothing goes in the trash? Can we create a brand that cares as much about where things end up as it does about selling stuff? What a novel concept, right? Because the
Yeah.
solutions that we're facing right now are not monopolized by one sector, right? It's not the answer does not lie with the consumer alone. It doesn't lie with the brand alone. It doesn't lie with retailers alone. It is a team effort, right? As consumers start to demand more clean, more sustainable, companies need to react, right? But when they react, they can't put things out there that are gonna, expect people to suddenly change consumer behaviors, right? So that's where we kind of went down that path of how do we do this in a way that people will actually take action on, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as we were going over all the material analysis of the different kind of packaging solutions that were out there, should we send stuff back to us or,
That's difficult to
have
do.
people take it into some retailer? And we're like, how many people are actually going to do that, right?
Yeah.
So when we started this brand, we actually started, that trip to Jakarta where you see us walking on these floating islands of plastic. I think we have that on junktheory.com.
Yeah.
Kind of take a look at a short clip, short
Yeah.
version of that. But once you see something like that, you can't unsee it. And when, what that trip inspired us to do is, we actually began our journey by dialing in on ocean waste plastic, right? Could we take this stuff out, create new bottles and jars with it? And at the end of the day, when people are done with it, we'll either upcycle it or they can recycle it. But the more that we learned about the recycling system, infrastructure here in the US, realizing the less than 5% is going to be recycled, we're like, no way. This stuff's just going to end up right back where we found it, right? And that's not why we're building a brand. We did a ton of other material analysis. Ultimately, we settled on the idea of creating an all metal-based packaging solution for our brand. Why? It's the most recycled and recyclable material on Earth, right?
Yes.
No extra heavy lifting, no take this back, no send it back. Everyone in their home has a little blue recycling bin, right?
Yeah.
Well, most of the plastic that you put in there won't get recycled. Most of the metal will, right? So, yeah, we created, to the best of my knowledge, the first skincare line to be entirely packaged in metal. It's not easy to do. You have to formulate specifically for it.
Yes.
You have to do a lot of stability and compatibility testing. And us getting to launch, I would say, took much longer than if we had just cut corners or if we had gone the easy route, you know? But
Yeah.
my hope is that when you do things the right way, the dividends pay out in the long term.
It
So,
does. It does. And I think, that's a beautiful background, which is also logical. I think, all the steps that you took, it was testing out one hypothesis, seeing the flaws with it, and then going with the ultimate option, which is all metal packaging. I
that's
think
right.
there are a few things that I wanted to understand in the context that you gave. Now, there are people out there, there are giants who have much more resources than you have, right? When you were starting. And ultimately, they can make this change, but they don't. Actually, they choose not to, right? And there are, in my experience, there are a couple of reasons to that. Of course, the overarching reason is, of course, the bottom line, that it does affect their bottom line. And when you're working at economies of scale, it makes a huge dent in going the recycling route or going the compostable route, or for that matter, the metal packaging route. I
Mm-hmm.
have seen metal packaging, but I think it's like 1% of the total product line of the brands, right? And it's mostly simply to send a message to the consumers that, hey, we are going in this direction. But then I also found some technical reasons to it, right? So, like you were mentioning that, the stability factor of the formulations that you put inside a metal also actually plays a huge role. Because with plastics, with minimum material, you're able to actually bring in like moisture barriers, oxygen barriers, so on and so forth, which might be difficult to do with aluminum, right? Or in general with any metal packaging, and that requires a lot of thinking. That requires somebody who actually wants to spend time in solving this problem, as can compared to somebody who's actually looking at the bottom line and then trying to find compromises. So I have looked at the sustainable packaging space in very, very detail, of large corporates and their initiatives, small startups, people doing material research, so on and so forth. But I think the research part is good, but then there is the application part where there is some shortcoming or the other.
Yeah.
So, can you highlight what were the struggles? What was the exact property or character that you were working on when you were trying to make this packaging stable? Because I
Yeah.
can imagine that the formulation might interact with the metal body. So,
You're exactly right, right? So part of the reason why some of these bigger brands are, the giants out there. Really, the beauty industry is controlled by half a dozen conglomerates
yes.
out there, right? The giants. For them to reformulate or anything like that in order to make their existing brands or formulas compatible in metal is probably a pretty big, heavy capital lift
Yes.
for them. And if it ain't broke, maybe you don't fix it, right?
Yeah.
The way that I view these conglomerates is they're kind of like battleships or
Yeah.
carriers, right? They're enormous, and their resources and ability to reach are something I could only dream of, right? But here's what we are at Junk Theory: we're a speedboat, right? We can turn, pivot, adjust, right? We're new, we're agile, and we can innovate, right?
Mhm.
And I think from a category perspective, it is easier for conglomerates to acquire young, smart, sophisticated, differentiated brands than it is for them to adjust their existing portfolios, right? Which
Yeah.
makes us very interesting from an
Yeah.
acquisition or growth perspective. Um, but look, it's also, with metal, there are other things that you need to factor in and consider, right? It's got a higher carbon footprint. It'll depend on whether you're using o-ring, new materials or you're using recycled metal.
Yeah.
So some of those things make a difference. And then also the barrier that you're going to put in, right? Because even metal, like any other kind of material, you're going to have some kind of a
Yes.
barrier there, right? So it's not, this is another aspect of our brand that I want to be very clear on is that, junk theory, the whole kind of concept behind it was just to get rid of all the junk in this category, from junk ingredients to junk packaging to junk claims, right?
Yeah.
So one, look, we disclose 100% of our ingredients, right? If you have nothing to hide, you show it all, right? But we also share that, despite the fact that this is a, metal packaging in a metal container, right? There is a small element of plastic in there. We have a BPA-free barrier
Yeah.
inside that keeps the water-based formulas from touching, contacting the metal. So as much as I would like to say, hey, Junk Theory is the first plastic-free skincare line, that's misleading, right? because we
Yeah.
have a little bit under 1 gram of plastic inside of it, right? We've got a little bit
Yeah.
of a liner there, right? So I'm honest with people about that, but I'm also honest with people about the fact that you could use our product every single day for 25 years and still have a smaller plastic footprint than if you just bought one skincare jar, product packaged in plastic. And this is something that I think we need to take very seriously in this industry. Last year alone, the beauty industry produced over 100 billion pieces of plastic packaging.
Wow.
Just last year, you know? And the absurdity of these double walled acrylic giant jars to hold 1.7 ounces of formula.
Yeah.
I want to start to change the narrative around that story. What bigger is better is kind of old thinking, right? I feel like sustainability is emerging as the new luxury, right? I
Yes.
like the fact that I have the same amount of product in here as they do in like something like this. And I hope that because I don't have the resources or the celebrity and things like that to engage people on that level, I have to be creative and think about how I engage. And I think what we want to do with Junk Theory is engage at a values level, right? Solve some basic problems, right? With people in the category when they're thinking about their daily routine, right? You're an adult, you use skincare, okay? What you don't want to have is you don't want guilt and guesswork behind your daily routine, right? You don't want to have to be a pharmacist to figure out whether the formulas you're using and putting on your skin are actually okay to use and healthy. And you don't want to have to feel guilty about buying the stuff that you need because you're going to be contributing to waste streams and plastic in the oceans, right?
Yes.
So this is a great opportunity, for the first time, really, is that a brand is taking care of all of that guilt and guesswork for you, right? No more junk ingredients, no more junk packaging, and no more, junk that you create from the things that you consume. I think it's also important to mention one other thing as well, because I love talking about packaging with Junk Theory. It's probably the thing that makes us more different than anything else. However, probably the most important lesson that I learned as chief giving officer at UB, where I just wanted to put impact before everything. Oh my God, we gave 1 million kids this year free sets of school supplies. That should be on the front of our webpage. That should be on every ad, things like that.
Mhm.
But what I very quickly realized is that in the impact space, in the social enterprise space, if you don't create a product that is better than what sits on the left or the right of it on the shelf, you can talk impact all day long. But no one's buying your product, you're not creating impact.
Yeah.
To create impact, create a better product than what sits to the left or the right of it on the shelf. And when people are buying skincare, they're actually not buying it for the packaging, they're buying it for the formulas, which is why we invested so much in creating formulas that are now winning awards all over the place in our category. Because at the end of the day, if people love our formulas, they're going to buy them again, right?
Yep.
Then we start to create impact, and they're going to tell other people about it as well. So
Absolutely. That makes sense. And I think one of the things that I actually wanted to talk about is the formula. So, how did you come up with? Because when I look at cosmetics industry, there is a lot of research involved. There are a lot of reactions involved. There are a lot of testing involved, and then there are a lot of regulations involved because it's human consumption. People are putting it on the skin, so it has to go through the FDA, right? And that takes time. That takes multiple clinical trials. In some cases, right? So,
you'd actually be surprised in the US, like the FDA, like, no, you don't.
oh,
Like,
really?
this, the FDA, the last time the FDA banned ingredients was like 1934 in the US, and they banned 11 ingredients. There's been some recent work done, but you compare that to where Europe is today, they
Uh-huh.
banned over 1,400 ingredients. It's like the Wild West in the US. Also,
Wow.
if you have ingredients in your formulas that are below 1% of your formula, you don't even have to disclose them.
Yeah.
This is what's crazy about the industry over here, and why it's so easy to do shortcuts, right? Our lives could have been so much easier at Junk Theory if we had just kind of made a few shortcuts here and there.
Yeah.
No, thank you. I'd rather take the hard route, and maybe it'll pay off down the road. But I know that I did the right thing.
Absolutely. I think, that's the key to sustainable business because, you can become successful very, very easily. But to sustain it, people have to like your products. They really have to be genuinely appreciative of the efforts that you took to actually make this. And then that's what I saw in the testimonies that's written on your website. That's featured there. Now, there was one comment that I particularly liked, and that talked about the formula being so good that there are 3 times costlier or much more expensive things are sitting on his shelf or her shelf. I don't remember the name, but the overall effect of the products that you guys are selling is much better. And that's the real advantage from a business point of view that I was able to see. Because I mean, you were right. I mean, you can make as good as packaging, as sustainable as packaging as possible, but the formula, the core product, has to be really good. So who helped you through that process? Was it you who took the initiative? Were there scientists and people who actually came together and then made this formulation? How
Yeah.
did that happen?
So our formulas, I would say, were arguably probably our largest investment that we did at the beginning. And it's I sometimes think we were crazy for doing that because it would have been so much easier to simply white label, right? I
Yeah,
90% of the new skincare brands that you're seeing come out, I don't care if it's a celebrity attached to it or not, it's just white labeled skincare, right? You've got formulators all over the US that put together their own formulas. You know, you like it as a base, right? You sprinkle in a couple of ingredients and you launch, you know,
yeah,
so much easier, so much cheaper, right? But again, getting back to doing things the right way, what we did is we diligenced all these formulators and found, you know, what I think is arguably the best green chemist in the US. They produce brands that we respect and that we really like. They formulated their formulas. And so we just began and sat down a process and we created these 3 formulas from scratch. We, you know, first identified what are the formulas, what are the products that people use the most every single day, right?
yeah,
I'm not here to create exotic, you know, things that 1 in 1,000 people will use. What I really want to do is change people's daily routine and eliminate plastic from their daily skincare routine, right? And that starts by identifying what are the formulas and products that people use the most every day, right? So we identified daily cleanser, daily moisturizer, and an overnight treatment. And that's our trio that we launched with, right?
yeah.
Then it was about creating a sort of no list, right? What were we called it a junk list, right? What are the junk kind of ingredients, right? The silicones, the phthalates, the animal products, the artificial dyes and alcohol, drying alcohols, all that stuff that is so commonly found in skincare, you know, we're like, no, right? And then we went beyond that and said, all right, if we're going to eventually scale this thing, I want my formulas ready from day one to go into Europe. So the FDA's banned 11 ingredients, Europe's banned 1,400. Junk Theory kept about 2,800 ingredients that are in common use out of our formulas. But then it's time to go, okay, we've got our junk list. Now what do we want to put in, right? And I think the most important thing, again, getting to this, just doing things the right way, is that I sat down and we sat down with our formula and we said, listen, when we create a formula and we make a claim, I want this formula to do what it says it does, okay?
Yeah.
I'm not going to interfere with how you create this and what we put together. But if I say that this will help, you know, with early signs of aging or redness or dryness on skin, I want it to do that, right? And so we created, you know, these incredible formulas from scratch. And then, you know, when it came to, you know, a fragrance profile, I thought that was one of the most fun portions of creating it, right? Because what's the first thing that people do when they get a new skincare something?
Smell.
Smell it, right? And
Yeah.
also what's interesting is we started diving into the science behind associative learning, right?
Ah,
And so it's the same science that when you smell, you know, fresh baked cookies, you think of grandma, right? It's
yeah.
that associative learning, right? And I thought one of the key principles behind junk theory is to really reconnect people with nature, right? Get out of your daily lives, get reconnected with the world around us, right? And one of
Yeah.
the ways of doing that was by creating these fragrance profiles. We don't use artificial fragrances, essential oils and things like that is fine. Um, that were kind of meant to connect and source with where we sourced our ingredients. So, for example, our Juni cleanser has, you know, volcanic ash water from the Cascadian Mountains in the Pacific Northwest, and it's got this incredible blend of kelp and algae that comes from there, right? So, what I wanted to do was tell a story that you know brought people on a journey about where we source these ingredients and reconnected them with nature, right? So you open up this cleanser bottle and it's like taking a walk in the woods after the rain, you know, very, very different. And, you know, a beautiful story to kind of share and to get people to connect with the formula. The other thing that I really like about that is that my hope is that once you've kind of created that associative memory, right, is that subtly somewhere at some point in your day, maybe because of your routine in the morning, You remember to take your tote when you went to the grocery store instead of having them give you plastic bags, something like that.
Yeah.
So it's fun, exciting. It's very expensive, but it's the right way to do it, and the vast majority of brands don't do it that way. It's a little dirty little secret in the
It's also
category.
very fun to hear about it. I would never imagine such an approach for creating formulas because you're right. There are people who have already done that. There are things that are already effective. There are things that even maybe synthetic are still useful to people, and that's why there are loyalty to those kind of brands, and that's what you need to change for other people. Now, which brings me to the next question, and strictly from a management perspective, since you're running this whole initiative, whole startup, you also have to look at the scalability part and the ideal customer fit part. Now, when I say ideal customer fit, you rightly mentioned that sustainability is the new luxury, which means luxury is less affordable to most people and more affordable to certain groups of
It's
people.
a tricky phrase because what I don't want to imply is that this is expensive if you want to play in this space. What I
Yeah.
want to imply is that the glamour of conspicuous consumption, brand facing stuff, the luxury brands that you show sort of, that are bigger than they need to be, that have
Yeah.
6 times the packaging that they need to have, is old thinking. The new thinking about what's really elevated out there is to kind of show off, I think, in a way, how little you consume, or how sort of responsible the products you choose are. So I'll give you an example. Like, it would be great to put our products in super fancy boxes and boxes inside boxes and things like that. But we did the exact opposite. So, for example, our starter kit, which has all three of our products in it, we just completely eliminated secondary packaging for it, right? So we ended up like, here's our starter kit here, right? When you open it up,
That's
here's
it.
our product. Like, you
Yeah.
don't need more packaging,
Yeah.
right? It's
Yeah.
here, it's safe, it's good. And not one single thing that we send you, from the shipper to the products, nothing goes in the trash.
Got
It's
it.
awesome.
That makes
And
sense.
that, I feel like, is like the new, elevated.
I think I now understand the use of the word luxury because when I think of luxury, it's like things that are not necessary for people, but they can afford it and they want to buy it, right? And probably the right word would be premiumization. If I pronounce it correctly, and because premium products in general for cosmetics are something which are associated with glamour, which are associated with things which are costlier, things that look shiny and glamorous, right? So maybe that's not what junk theory does. What junk theory does is more the sustainable luxury part. That makes sense. And I think so. Then I think the first question that I was asking you was about the ideal customer fit. But
Right.
by the definition that you just provided, most people will find this to be an ideal fit, right? And then
Yeah.
comes the part about scalability. Now you have metal, and you have customers who believe in plastic free cosmetics, they believe in sustainable living, so on and so forth. Now
Yes.
that still brings the chunk to a much smaller part. If you consider the loyalty towards other brands that they have been using for years and years, and they know its
Right.
efficacy. So how do you plan to tackle this on? What's the future in terms of growth, in terms of size, in terms of how quickly you want to reproduce these
Yeah.
brands to more and more shelves?
So there's a lot of dynamics to that question, and it is not an easy answer. And I'm not sure we have enough time to talk about all the different dynamics at play there. But I'll try and keep it high level and
Sure.
say you're absolutely right. Scaling is difficult. There's no lack of people out there. Like, the beauty industry is large enough, and there's enough
Yeah.
consumers out there. Even if doesn't make up the entire 100% of beauty consumers out there, even if it's 5%, there's still just tons of consumers out there that are looking for solutions like junk theory. The question is, how do you reach them, right? So when we launched, having gone through, we started this concept, like, and 2 weeks later, the entire world shut down with COVID. So talk about difficulties in raising money and having face-to-face meetings and supply chain disruptions and things like that. It was a nightmare. So took me 3 times longer than I thought it would, and at 3 times the cost. So by the time we got to launch, we basically had to launch organically. Very, very different than how we did Ubi before. But it's incredible how necessity, truly is the mother of invention. You have to be creative, right? And you have to think outside the box and do things that others either aren't willing to do, or just, don't do. So, we launched very, very organically. However, because of the work that we put into the formulas and the brand concept and the kind of values that we put forward here, what we've realized is that one, we've been winning awards all over the place in the category, right? So we have engaged in some PR, but that's given us a legitimacy that I think is really important for a new brand, to be featured and to start winning awards in your category. Secondly, the other thing that I think is really exciting about our brand is that we have roughly double the repeat purchase rate of our category average right now. So about 40% of first-time buyers are buying a second and third time now.
Wow.
Twice the industry average. So that again says, hey, we're doing something right here, and this matters. Now the question is, how do we go beyond our sort of organic reach and start to grow? What's our customer acquisition strategy? And I think that when you're a very, very small team with very limited resources, you kind of have to make choices and pick some lanes to go into. So I think some of the low-hanging fruit that we can start to expand into now, as we're really a D2C focused brand right now, is, getting email up and going and a proper email campaign, with our existing customers and with new outreach. It's starting to dabble into performance marketing, right? I want to understand, a couple of key things that are really important in terms of determining our ability to scale in digital channels, which is, what's our customer acquisition cost, and what's our real LTV there, right? And bottom line is what's my return on ad spend going to be? Is this a scalable brand? Are we putting the right messages out there? And are we reaching the right kind of people? So that for me starts very small, right? Testing. Let's test our message. Is the message about our formulas getting through faster, or is the message about our packaging getting through faster? Then it's connecting with and identifying digital audiences that other brands cannot speak to in the way that we can. Who are the anti-plastic fanatics out there, right? Who are the influencers out there going, screaming at the top of their lungs about plastic? Because my guess is the people that are following them also care about these issues. And we at Junk Theory can talk to them in a way that no other brand can. Another tactic is also education and educational content. And that's something that we're going to want to start to put out there as well, because I think people don't realize that this is a category that produces 100 billion pieces of packaging a year. People don't realize that only 5% of plastic, gets recycled in the US. It's crazy. Let's start talking about that, right? Let's start talking about, how this industry can change. My hope is that, to be quite honest, is that there's nothing really unique about Junk Theory from a packaging perspective 5 years from now. I hope that we can inspire brands that are so much bigger than us to start to rethink what it means to be a clean brand and their role in sustainability. So, when we launched this thing, like I was saying, my co-founder and I said to ourselves, can we create a brand where nothing goes in the trash? And I want to challenge other industry leaders to ask that very question. How close can they come, to that? The other thing I was going to say is that I don't think it's a good idea to be in a single channel. Ultimately, if you want to grow, you have to start thinking omni-channel, right? So I think a big strategy for us next year is going to be, entering into conversations with major beauty retailers, right? I think it's a very interesting idea to get in the kitchen with them early, right? We go out to a Sephora or a Credo, instead of me telling them, here are the next 2 formulas that I want to do for this brand, it may be interesting for them to say, here's the next 2 I think you should do. I have a couple of prototypes of some next gen packaging, like the next generation lineup, which is, I think could be one of the biggest sustainability stories in the category's history.
So, you were talking about the new releases that you have in mind, that you have in plan, and those are going to be game changing. That's where you were alluding to.
Yeah. So compared to anything on the market right now from a sustainability perspective, I think where we're at already, it's interesting because, Credo is one of the biggest, clean beauty retailers in the US. Their head of sustainability is on our advisory, and she basically told us, their former head, I should say, she told us where our brand is positioned right now is better than where they want to be, positioned, at the end of the decade. I can see and I know where Sephora is heading as well. I know where Ulta is heading from their clean sections. And, what they're doing is they're talking about things like slow incremental change, right? Which I think is important. And everything needs to head in the same kind of right direction. But I don't think we have time for small incremental change. And as a brand leader, I don't like the idea of creating things that are only incrementally better. I want to create things that are impossible to ignore, and that's what I think junk theory is. And I think when we sit down with these retailers, they're going to see, kind of how much of a difference there is between what's being offered, from our brand versus anything sitting to the left or right of it on shelf.
Now you have piqued my suspense, because now I'll be on the lookout for your new launch and your new tie-ups with the retail brands. I think we have talked about the philosophy, the hard work, and the methodological thinking, which makes your brand sustainable, noticeable, so on and so forth. I think so. There are two questions that I wanted to ask you. One is there is recyclability part,
Right.
which you looked into in depth, and you understood that it's not really recyclability that's in its true form being practiced right now, whether it is United States or whether it is any other country out there in the world. But then there is also the compostability factor, right? Brands are using two-pronged approach where they are, of course, working on the recyclability portion, but also on the compostability part. Now,
Mm-hmm.
compostability, I understand, is at very nascent stage. It's not at a stage where you can make 100% of your products completely compostable, right? But ultimately, I see a lot of regulations around it. I see Europe, like you mentioned, passing laws, making regulations that will actually force even bigger players to go the compostability route, which
Yep.
means that may become a disruptor to the metal packaging in the future.
I hope so. I hope so. Would that be great? Here's what I can tell you about junk theory and our packaging philosophy and material philosophy. We took almost 3 years, okay, almost 3 years to get to market because we did so much material analysis on different options, right? We started with ocean waste plastic, right?
Yeah,
The more I learned about recycling, I'm like, this stuff is going to end up right back where it came from. We're not doing any good. We can tell a cool story that people will like, but at the end of the
yeah,
day, it'll all end up right back where we found it, right?
yeah,
Then we started looking at natural fibers and like, you know, wood pulp material. I mean, I have something here that's like, it's like wood
yeah,
pulp. It's
yeah.
cool, right? It's great. It's compostable, right? The problem with composting, especially in the US, is the infrastructure is not in place.
Yes,
The only way these things can be effectively composted is at an industrial level, right?
yes,
If you were to show me a product or a material that was home compostable, right? You just chuck it in your yard and it's going to turn into dirt or soil, I will switch to it in 1 second, right? I'm not, we're not tied to metal as in like this entire brand lives and dies by us choosing this one material. What I want is the smartest, best, most responsible material available on the market. And maybe 2 years from now, that'll be a seaweed polymer that someone creates, right?
yeah,
Great. I would love it, and we'll make that switch then. But for now, this is the best option in terms of the infrastructure for recycling, compostability, all those kind of things. There is no better option than what we have on the table right now, and it's not perfect, but
yeah.
it's a damn sight better than anything else in the market right now.
That
The
makes
other thing that I think comes close is glass, but
yeah,
glass has its own problems, right? It's recycled about half as much as aluminum,
yeah,
but it's still recycled about 5 times more than plastic.
yeah.
But it's heavy and it breaks, right?
Yes,
One of the things that we discovered about our packaging is that it's super lightweight, and people have been telling us this is awesome to travel with. The other thing is you drop it or whatnot, it dents. So
yeah.
what? It doesn't break,
You
and
know,
it's light. So
it
uh,
does check all the boxes. I mean, in terms of logistics, in terms of transportation, so on and so forth. So, and then
yeah.
in terms of the vision and the philosophy that you have about recyclability, when that makes sense. I think also metal is much more costlier than glass, so people
Mhm.
would want to reuse it because I mean it's precious material to be wasted. I mean they will not do that, right?
We have
So
entire blogs about ways, like it's like 54 ways to reuse our packaging. Don't just don't recycle it right away. Use it as a little snack tin if you're going on a hike. Put some trail mix in there.
yeah,
After you wash it, of course. But there's all kinds of fun ways to reuse our packaging. We tell people to go ahead and do that until they're ready to recycle it.
so Justin, who takes care of the marketing aspect of junk theory? Is it you or somebody else?
It's primarily my co-founder. That's her background. That's her expertise. She's incredible at it. And
Yeah, I
so,
mean, I can see that.
yeah, she's done a really great job. But, the other thing is that when you're working in such a small team, you kind of have to be the captain of everything. You can't be siloed, too siloed, right? So
Yes.
we've not just had to learn, how to market and all of those aspects. We've had to learn how to, like, if something happens on our website, how do we correct that?
Yeah.
How do we get new imagery up on our website? How do we do promotional things on social media channels and setting all of that up? How do we, can we set up? That's another thing that I think probably towards the end of the summer we'll launch subscription for the first time, which will be
Wow.
really great. But it's complicated. It's not just like, hey,
Yes.
slap a little add-on to your thing and you can suddenly subscribe. What happens when you have bundles, when there's different timing for things to return? So we have to learn all these things kind of on the go, as well as managing outside, agencies and consultants and people that help
Yeah.
us out. Nothing was easy,
Nothing
but
is ever
when it's
easy.
hard and you
Yeah.
have limited resources, your only life raft is learn
Yes.
quickly, make
Yes.
mistakes, but learn from them. It's
Yes.
not a mistake if you learn from it.
Yes. I think at the beginning you talked about your non-linear career aspects, right?
Yeah.
And I think when I see somebody who has started a company, a brand, their journey is also very non-linear, right? I mean, it's like you need to get things done, whether it is marketing, whether it is talking to big brands, whether it is solving a small problem, which is becoming a big hiccup in your production, so on and so forth, right? So in a way, I mean, this is a most common quality that I have seen in people leading initiatives, leading startups, leading brands, that they have had a history of non-linear learning curve, and which they are able to actually leverage during their CEO tenure also. That, I mean, they're able to learn quickly, get to the next problem very, very quickly, and then move on from there. Has that also been one of your strengths that you consciously realize? Because I see that people do it very unconsciously,
Hmm.
but being a third party observer, I see that quality in most of the people that I talk to who are leading initiatives and who have gone through tough phases like COVID. I mean, you were talking about COVID. I mean, it's difficult to get back from that when when things are stalled, when you know that you were going to launch but you have to wait for 2 years and then move on from there, right? So what's your perception, what's your thinking on the non-linear learning curve, or changes in career? Because you were an attorney, I would never imagine an attorney leading a beauty brand.
Yeah, I think it's a little bit different for everyone. I'm reading Scott Galloway's new book right now, and I just went through the chapter where he was kind of talking about that in terms of how there are advantages to being a CEO once you've had broad experience across a wide variety of sectors, because you've kind of seen things, you've
Yeah.
kind of seen everything, and you've seen different approaches and different angles to how problems are solved, how solutions are found, and the likes. I think there are advantages and disadvantages because at some point you have to find the right balance between width and depth. So
Yeah.
you need to have skill sets that are specific to the area that you're working in. But, kind of like life, the more broad your experience is, the more innovative and creative you can be. You might be able to think of things that, others haven't. And you can relate to people in a different way. I kind of like to joke about the fact that I was a lawyer, because I'm like, I managed to salvage what was left of my sense of humor before I got out of that space. But I think what it did is it gives people, an impression, whether correct or not, that I'm smart and I can navigate and I can grow a business, and manage it pretty well. But how's that experience? 5 years of practice in corporate law, compared to someone who spent 5 years as the head of marketing on in a beauty brand. They both produce different things, and
Yes.
I think that's where partnership and finding the right kind of partner becomes so important. Which is why Ali, my co-founder here, she spent so much time in the marketing space and has such a depth of knowledge about how to market a brand to consumers that I just didn't have that kind of same experience as her.
Mhm.
So it's just about finding the right kind of partners, complementing skills, and adapting the things that you learned outside of your specific space into innovative ways of thinking about your space.
That makes sense. I think, and that's also a common characteristic of people finding. I mean, if you can't do it, I mean, you find somebody who can do it better than you. I mean, that's the whole game. But Justin, I'm going to ask you the last question, and it's a tangential question, right? So you mentioned that you list down all the ingredients that you have used in your products, and you're very open and transparent about it. So does that mean that you what's your perspective about IP in general, right? So I mean, when I look at cosmetics brand, they have so many patents. I mean, they have 30,000 patents, 40,000 patents. They have trade secrets kept all logged somewhere, very well protected.
Right.
And on the other hand, you're working in the same space, which is, as you mentioned, very crowded. You need to have a competitive edge. Patents sometimes do provide that competitive edge that it prevents somebody from actually copying it. It also gives that a surety to someone that, hey, I mean, whatever they're doing, I mean, if they got a patent, that means it's innovative. So, what's your opinion there? Are you guys patenting? Do you have an IP strategy? And in general, what's your thought on the usefulness of IP in your domain? Too many
I think it's
questions?
interesting. I mean, I'm not sure I've formulated like a certain opinion on it. Here's what I can say is like, look, if you have the resources and the means to protect some kind of proprietary formula or molecule or something that is going to advantage your formulas over someone else, great,
Mhm.
go for it. I think that is more the exception than the rule, though. I think those kind of cases where someone has got some kind of formulaic, property that has a competitive advantage, highly, highly unlikely, right? I think where you see IP kind of come in a little bit more is in naming conventions, protecting the names, what you want to call things. It's some of these big conglomerates, like we had thought of alternative names, and everything is like spoken for or taken. Someone has
Yeah,
trademarked something, in our category.
yeah,
Whether it's a single perfume that was launched by Chanel 20 years ago, you know what I mean? It's like,
yes, it's trademarked.
and we ran into that issue, as we were developing. Actually, we had a different name for the brand, and we had a like Manuka Honey Company come up to us, and they had a similar sounding brand name, right? But they're making honey, right?
Yeah,
But they said that because it's like a Manuka honey, there's topical applications, right? You can put it on wounds and things like that, right? So they registered it in our name, and on like day 30 of us publishing our trademark application, or day 29, the day before it was supposed to close, they hit us with a cease and desist. Now
wow.
here's where IP really comes into play. If you really want the truthy truth behind all this stuff, right?
Yes,
It is an offensive tactic, right? The company that hit us up, right, had nothing to do with what we do, right? We make skincare, they make honey, but they knew we didn't have the resources to defend. I think we would have won had we defended. It's so different. Even the name, different letters, all that kind of stuff. It's not the same word or anything, but it's $100,000 to defend something like that in the US,
yes,
right? Are you going to put $100,000 as a nascent startup brand into like defending something like that? No. So that's where I think you need to be really careful. Where I do think it is important to invest time and energy before you create a brand around something is to lock the IP in it, in that, right? But that's focusing mostly around trademarks versus like patents on formulas and whatnot. If you have the resources to get patents on formulas that can make you incrementally better, that's amazing, right?
yeah.
For 99% of startups out there, that's not a reality though. So how do we navigate those waters?
That makes sense. I think that's a very practical approach, and that's a right approach at the right time. I think maybe the approach needs to change as you become very, very big. Then you may want to sue somebody because somebody is trying to imitate you.
Where this could actually be really interesting, we've started to think about this, is in our new packaging designs, are there patentable applications? Like as we kind of go into the final stages of it, is it worth it for us to have a patent attorney take a look at that and see if there are claims that we can make? Because what then can happen is that, not only can we grow as a skincare brand, but we might be able to license that to other
Exactly.
brands as well, and have a whole like kind of licensing, manufacturing
Yes.
for packaging as well, which could be interesting and a good hedge against the core business. Um, but that's a bit of a luxury right now to think about. Right now, what we are dead focused on is, how do we grow this brand? How do we change the category, and make the world a kinder, better place to live in?
If you're thinking about it, then I think you're doing the right thing, because ultimately, I mean, the more thoughts you have put in it, when the right time comes, you may want to implement that, and you won't have to start from zero. So that's a good thing. And I think you mentioned acquisition as something which is a common practice in the beauty industry, consolidation. If a brand has developed a loyal customer base and it has a unique selling point for its audience, for example, the fanatic supporters of no plastic cosmetics, I mean, they are always going to be loyal to you because they have used your product and it satisfies all of their criterias and needs and wants. And maybe IP also gives you that edge along with this, that hey, I mean, look at us. Not only do we have the consumer base, but also the protection to actually support that, right? So that may make you much more attractive. But again, I mean, I have seen both sides of the story happening. So I think it's a strategy you will decide when the time comes when you cross that bridge.
Yeah,
But
what I think is interesting
yeah,
about the acquisition opportunity, right? I think it's an interesting thing to think about as an impact brand, right? Because there's pitfalls and perils and great opportunity as well, right? You get acquired by the wrong person for the wrong reasons, and there goes your entire impact, right? What are the safeguards that you can put in place to ensure that the core mission that you set out for with the brand is preserved, right? So one of the
yeah,
things that we did is we became a benefit corporation, right? Where we can maximize and prioritize impact over profits, right?
mm,
As a core foundational document of what this brand is all about, right? And any acquirer is going to see that, right away.
yeah,
However, and a lot of people, they warn about this, right? Don't get acquired by this and that, right? Look, here's my taking is I've always viewed this brand as something that can inspire the industry, right? And if a conglomerate or much larger brand can come in and say, hey, we really want to elevate our sustainability profile, and we can help you, kind of massively scale this brand and take it internationally and things like that, and have a multiplying effect on the kind of core impact that we want to create in this category. Why wouldn't I consider something like that?
yeah, absolutely.
How quickly can I scale this thing on my own versus getting a powerhouse involved with the brand eventually, to help me do that. So long
Yeah,
as we're
absolutely.
mission aligned and value aligned, I think that's an interesting conversation to have down the road. But
And
first, before you can even have that conversation, you got to scale the brand, right? Too small, doesn't matter.
yep.
Start picking up market share, eyeballs start turning.
Yep.
So how do we
You
how do
have
we
to
get them
first
where
get
we are?
noticeable to actually get into that conversation. I mean, that makes sense. Yeah. But great talking to you, Justin. I think it's very interesting to hear your journeys. I could also see some of the aspects from your lawyer days actually coming into to the formation of the corporation like you were talking about. So all aspects of the journey that you have taken, all experiences, I think it's somewhere reflecting in the brand, in the philosophy, in the future that you are envisioning. Great talking to you. Thank you again for your time, and
Because
hopefully a lot more people like this, and they reach out to you directly.
yeah, and for anyone interested in learning more, they can just go to junktheory.com and check out the brand, give it a shot.
Absolutely, it's janktheory.com.
All right.
So thanks,
Thank you
Justin. Thanks
so
again for
much.
your
I
time.
appreciate the
Yeah, I'm
time.
going.